Okay, so let's picture this. A massive empire, industrializing at a breakneck pace, all on the verge of a revolution. But its energy grid? It's a complete patchwork, built on a whole series of local and often totally conflicting choices. Today, we are going to dig into how the Russian Empire actually built its electrical future in those critical decades right before the First World War.
All right, to really wrap our heads around this, we've got to start with the fuel itself. An economist at the time, L.B. Kafengas, described Russia's energy situation as this constant, fluctuating tug of war. For a little while, it really looked like oil and coal were the future, mineralization. But then, one crisis after another hits. And if you look at this timeline, the country actually starts going backward, back to firewood, right as the world is about to explode into war. It's pretty wild.
So get this. At the exact same time the fuel supply is in total chaos, the demand for electricity is just going through the roof. I mean, look at these numbers. In less than 10 years, the number of power stations nearly doubles, and the amount of energy they're producing, it quadruples. This wasn't some slow, gradual change. This was a full-on technological firestorm.
And this is where you can see the real story, the why behind that explosion. In 1905, electricity use was split pretty evenly, right? Half for public stuff like lighting and trams, half for industry. But jump forward just 8 years and boom, industry is eating up almost 70% of the power. This tells you electricity stopped being a luxury and started becoming the absolute lifeblood of the Russian economy.
So, this all brings us to the central question, doesn't it? With this massive demand and a totally unpredictable fuel supply, how in the world did individual cities make these huge, long-term decisions about their infrastructure? What was guiding their choices?
Well, to make sense of all this, we can use a really useful concept called path dependence theory. Think about it like this. The very first path you cut through a dense forest quickly becomes the easiest one for everyone to follow. Pretty soon, it's the only path anyone uses, even if a much better, more direct route exists just a few feet away. In the same way, the early choices a city made about its power grid, what field to burn, who owns a station, those choices locked them onto a specific path, for better or for worse.
When a city decided, okay, we need a power station, they basically had 3 models to choose from, each with its own set of trade-offs. They could give a concession to a private company. That gets it built fast, but it's usually expensive for the public. The city could build its own station, which is great in theory, but often turn into a financial black hole. Or they could try this really interesting consumer-based model where the users were the owners. That could be cheap and efficient, but it required a ton of local coordination.
Now, what's so fascinating here is that for all the fancy new technology, the single biggest deciding factor often boiled down to simple geography. Where you were on the map pretty much determined what you were burning. Up north, you used wood. Down south, you had access to coal and oil. And if you were a port city like St. Petersburg, you were probably shipping in coal from Great Britain. It really wasn't one big, unified system. It was more like a collection of little, local energy bubbles.
And believe me, this was not just a technical debate among engineers. It got intensely political. Just listen to this quote from city officials in Vologda. They're basically saying, hold on, why are we even talking about this? This is just a luxury for rich people to light up their apartments. It's a really powerful reminder that not everyone saw this new tech as a universal good.
In Vologda, though, the pro-electricity side eventually won out, and they did it by completely reframing the argument. They said, this isn't about luxury, it's about public safety, lighting up dark streets to prevent crime and reducing the risk of fires. The solution they landed on is just a perfect example of path dependence in action, a consumer-owned station running on the absolute cheapest and most available local fuel they had, firewood.
But just having experts in the room wasn't a silver bullet. Take the city of Arkhangelsk. They made what seemed like one small mistake at the very beginning. They let pretty much anyone build power lines anywhere. The result was pure chaos. You had 3 tiny, competing, inefficient power stations that were all stuck and couldn't grow. The city got locked into a completely fragmented system. A perfect case study of how one early misstep on the path can lead you right to a dead end.
So if we zoom back out and look at the big picture, around 1911, this is what the empire's power grid looked like. It's not one clean, unified system. It is a messy, complicated patchwork. Yeah, coal and oil are the big dogs, but you've still got cities running on wood, on charcoal, even on low-quality brown coal. It just goes to show how deeply decentralized and localized this whole revolution really was.
And here's the kicker, the most surprising part of this whole story. Right before the war, you'd think the push would be for bigger, more modern mineral-based fuels. But the exact opposite was happening. A so-called oil famine
and sky-high transportation costs were actually forcing a retreat back to local, sometimes kind of weird, fuel sources. I mean, the enormous new power station built to serve Moscow wasn't designed for coal or oil. It was built to run on peat that they were literally digging out of local bogs. That's how desperate the situation was getting.
And that leaves us with a final, lingering thought. All of these pre-war choices, driven by local pragmatism and economic necessity, they created an energy system that was, in some ways, really resilient. But in other, more critical ways, it was deeply fragmented and terribly vulnerable. A reality that was about to be put to the ultimate test in the coming years of war and revolution.